Danganronpa.
Spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. Seriously. This series is the definition of one that is easily spoiled, and it can lose a lot of its luster if you end up getting spoiled like that. Danganronpa, another episode, plays with a lot of plot elements that are hidden behind plot twists of the original two games, and even these include the premise of the game itself. And trust me, the series is very good and very worth going into blind. With that said, this is your last chance to leave before I get into any sorts of spoilers for the first two games, and I'll give any warnings before another episode spoilers, because there are going to be some, because it's very difficult to discuss this without those. Danganronpa, another episode, Ultra Despair Girls, aka its Japanese name is even longer, is the first spin-off game in the Danganronpa series, released in September of 2015 in the United States and other Western territories. The third release so far, the game acts as an interquel between the first game, Trigger Happy Havoc, and the second game, Goodbye Despair. The series has been developed by Spike Chunsoft and is well known for its murder mystery concept, atmosphere, characters, plot twist, and trial-based gameplay systems. A visual novel adventure game series for the first two mainline entries, another episode takes a spin-off approach by throwing the characters into an action game with a focus on third-person shooting and puzzles. Danganronpa is a traditionally visual novel adventure game series that uses trial-based gameplay system with mini-games and some minimal simulation elements. Another episode uses a third-person shooter-focused action game system. The large deviation from the previous games is a bold move and puts a lot of risk into the title. Primarily, another episode gives a focus on non-traditional action experiences with a greater emphasis on power-ups and puzzles built around those power-ups. The hacking gun, or your main weapon with Komaru, can use over a half a dozen different types of bullets ranging from remote control to rapid-fire flame blast. While each is stylized and different primarily in mechanics over the end result, they are explained away as having a similar effect on the enemies as their stylization implies, but just really in a metaphorical sense. Third-person shooting is done with the camera over Komaru's shoulder and a laser sight focusing in on your target. Aiming can be a bit stiff, but it was quite clearly not made by people who have a ton of experience in this genre already. Generally, enemies are slow enough to compensate for this already. You can unlock the ability to auto-lock onto enemies, but you don't really get to choose which one it is among enemy groups, which can be a bit of a pain when you are fighting a big groups with a bunch of enemies. Where the real fun of the TPS shooting comes into play is the before-mentioned power-ups. Every type of bullet provides a different upside and downside. For example, knockback throws enemies back, but gives you a very small output of actual damage. Shot can hit groups of enemies with devastating consequences, but has very little ammo and works better in different environments. Different enemy types have very different strengths and weaknesses that require intelligent variation in your use of the different bullets in your arsenal. Switching between your options on the fly gives a player a real opportunity to play to their own style and requires them to think their way through particular enemy groups instead of making the game about finesse and pure skill. This take on thought-provoking gameplay is taken to another level by providing an assortment of puzzles scattered throughout the story for the player to solve using some combination of these bullets against a platoon of enemies. Arcade machines pop up that ask the player to destroy all enemies with several types of bullets in an isolated designed environment. Every puzzle has a single intended solution, and they provide a good change of pace for the game throughout the narrative and third-person shooting aspects. To note, you're not actually required to complete any given puzzle, as destroying all the enemies in any fashion will open the path forward regardless. The player's never really handed anything more than a single line of direction. Other times it's extremely unclear what the game means by certain objectives or how they actually want you to solve that puzzle. Even worse, the game penalizes you for resetting the puzzle. The penalizations are not major and often are really inconsequential to progress in the game, but experimentations are put on the same level as dying in combat and not even completing the puzzles to begin with. Which really brings me to my greatest issue with the gameplay, the grading. At the end of each chapter, the game gives you a grade based on how many of the puzzles you've completed, how many of the specific collectibles you've found, and how many retries you used between dying and the various puzzle solving. Again, this grading system does not stop the progress or even slow it. It offers rewards for those who did well, but even those are small in the big picture. My issue primarily lies with how the grading is determined, as it feels misrepresentative of the gameplay as a whole. If anything, it's a lingering frustration that will annoy those who are told they didn't do well because of not finding these collectibles or not getting what a puzzle wanted you to do on the first shot. Outside of the TPS gameplay, we have good old Toko. She can use her Genocide Jack form for a limited time based on the amount of shock she gives herself with her taser. Genocide Jack, with her invincibility and over-the-top attacks, is basically easy mode for the game. The different difficulty settings are based around this mechanic, and she was clearly implemented for visual novel players who just wanted nothing to do with the third-person shooting gameplay. The game wouldn't work without her, though. Some mechanics are built around her usage, and she acts as a get-out-of-jail-free card that you will probably want to use at some point. In the end, both ways of playing are fun, and if catered towards different audiences, it's not sparkly justice in the night that makes you desperate to play the game, but it offers a decent or better complement to the story wove around it. The story of another episode is one that draws heavily on the first two entries, and that leads me to once again reiterating the spoiler warning. Notably, the story as a whole is very difficult to discuss without delving into spoilers, at least for the beginning of another episode, and the spoilers for the first two games. So before I get into it, here's a spoiler-free TLDR version of my opinion. For a Danganronpa fan, it's worth the investment. It starts strong, middles in the middle, and ends with an exciting enough set of sequences to make everything easily worth it. The game gives a bigger emphasis on character growth than the previous entries and can get hung up on what it's trying to do with character growth and ideological rants a bit much. It's certainly a story for Danganronpa fans without a doubt, worth it if you're a fan of the series. For those interested in third-person shooters or action games by themselves, this story will inevitably come across as incredibly convoluted. Now, for the full version. The following will spoil at least the opening sequence of the story and give broad overviews that could spoil aspects of the later parts of the game. You have been warned, and if you're a Danganronpa fan, you should know better than to watch this section of the video anyways. I'll give a nice little annotation here if you want to jump ahead to the next section. Okay. A handful of the previous casts from Danganronpa 1 and 2 make their way into the game. As an interlude between the two, the promise of the potential look at the lives of DR2 cast members in their ultimate despair forms is limited to only one member. What member, may you ask? Well, Nagito, of course, because of course it's him. The original Danganronpa's cast shows up with Makoto and Byakuya taking background roles, and Toko being a major character who travels alongside the lead, Komaru. Speaking of Komaru, there are a lot of references to the first game's cast by way of family members. Komaru is Makoto's little sister, and the game has a large gathering of surviving relatives from the Hope's Peak 78th class. Most are short-lived, and most of them do not suffer enviable fates themselves. The impact isn't big, but it is a nice little touch. As the game takes on the characters of the previous games, it also takes on the thematic elements of previous games. This can result in ideologies being heavily over the top to the point it influences the world design and Komaru herself. The entire premise is that Komaru is sent into a hunting game for a gang of delusional murderous children in a city they took over. Accompanied by Toku, Komaru fights her way through the legions of Monokuma robots with a hacking gun and Toko's trusty scissors. The children manage to transform the town into one brimming with despair at every corner, and the game loves to remind you about it. Now, Danganronpa has always been very strong-handed in its thematic messages. Another episode is no different, but the themes can creep up into areas of the game design previously unaffected. This works to varying effects, as it can either be a bit too strong-handed at times, or develop an excellent atmosphere. The thematic elements carry over to the plot, of course. Komaru's adventure through Despairland starts with a fast and brutal introduction to the realities of the world she is trying to escape, and consistently ups the amperage as the challenge is laid out more clearly in front of her. Soon enough, she is sent into the town, with the children-headed warriors of hope excited for their new prey. The story can start to slow after the strong start. Seemingly wanting to keep its cards held close, the chapters start to become formulaic. New events happen, but the pacing between interesting reveals or character moments can often drag into a slog. It relies too heavily on gameplay at times, which serves best in a complementary role. This is not to say the story isn't worth it. As with the previous Danganronpa games, the last major act sets the excitement to several levels higher. The ending, without spoiling it, is a roller coaster of emotions and twists that those who love the series will inevitably get excited about and possibly even hold dear. The ending alone makes the ride completely worth it, even if the middle section begins to slog for you personally. Part of what makes the ending so good is the setup. Another episode has a much more sparse cast than the previous entry, and it works well with them by providing in-depth character arcs for those taking center stage. With the greater emphasis on the people and how it changes them, the ending's twist hit home even harder, subverting some expectations and offering the most satisfying ending to a Danganronpa game yet. But again, as good as the plot aspects can be for both the highs and lows of such efforts, its appeal is restricted to Danganronpa fans. The plot does not make much of an attempt to become newcomer friendly, and this, of course, has its own upsides and downsides. Another episode has some of the best art direction I've seen in a game in some time. Not only does it work wonderfully at offering a stylized take on the world, it creates an atmosphere perfectly fitting of the narrative. This all happens as the game creates new approaches to presentation, while also building up the presentation styles made popular in past games. The typical world is told through a visual novel format with a fully realized 3D world as the backdrop. Character reactions and this conversation makes up the bulk of the game with its competent, less expensive flair. Add to this are cutscenes ranging from the anime animation, fully rendered 3D rendered shots, and traditional pseudo 3D cutout style that was popularized in the past two games. The accomplishment is managed when none of these feel out of place and the art style never feels warped or inconsistent between them. The interface itself is very stylized along with everything else in the style, fitting in with its own chibi art and a similar color schemes as everything else. There isn't much more to say about the UI. It's nice looking, but never struck me as anything particularly special. It's quite competent. Musically, the game also pulls from the past, and it might do a tad too much, as the reliance on old tracks and variations of the same tracks between chapters can be a bit disappointing. Danganronpa 2 made a similar move by attempting to expand the soundtrack rather than reinvent it, but it's not ideal, especially on the third attempt. The music is still wonderfully great, but it might be lacking a bit in the freshness department. Unfortunately for another episode, the defining factors that make the game worth it are heavily based around the appeal of having played the previous games in the series, whether that is the plot or the gameplay designed to be played around the difficulty the player chooses at. The game was clearly made for those who are already engrossed in this great universe and cast. The basis from other games isn't exactly a bad thing when it comes to pure quality, though. Narratively, the looks at old and new characters in this new light really does offer a worthwhile new entry. Gameplay-wise, the little details put into it make it still feel like a Danganronpa game despite that different genre, and this is actually quite appreciated. The game can be fun at times and not at others. More often than not, the gameplay offers a complementary service to the plot and works very well in that role. While they aren't ingrained in one another, the quick thinking needed for a strategic bullet system keeps the tension going as the plot wants it to, and the puzzles offer the same sort of deduction skills that fans will be putting into play over the course of the plot of the entire game. This is the case for the majority of the game, bar the pacing issues in the middle chapters. Overall, it's fun, it's good, it's what you'd really want out of the game if you're a fan already, but it's not anything revolutionary, and it will not appeal to people that don't like the series already. Danganronpa Another Episode is a game made for fans of the series and few else. With the recently announced Danganronpa 3 on the horizon, it offers an exciting side story that leans heavily on the world established by the first two games. Komaru's taken on an adventure through despair that allows her to overcome ordeals she is thrown into, and new wrinkles in the world build that world up even higher than before. Excellent voice acting and the melding of old and new presentation styles into a well-refined faction do well to put the icing on this delicious despair cake. The plot alone is certainly enough to be worth it to fans of the series, but the gameplay offers a surprising depth to offer even more reasons to pick up the title. It may not be the best polished offering mechanically, but the ideas put together offer a lot of possibilities that span from action to puzzles seamlessly. It doesn't really have enough polish intensity itself to make it to Showtime. However, it does work exceedingly well in a role complementary to the story outside of the spotlight. Now, for the rating, I would certainly recommend a recommended rating for Ultra Despair Girls. It's an outing every Danganronpa fan will want to be a part of, but the side romp into a different genre doesn't really allow the cohesiveness and polish that really held up the previous entries in the series. Then you have to consider how it's a very good Danganronpa game, but it's not a very good action game. The appeal is limiting and it really does show. A must-play for fans of the first two. Everyone else should try those two before they even consider touching another episode. Now for recommendations. Well, first of all, the first big one that I'm probably going to have to suggest is the Danganronpa series. If you are watching this, if you've played another episode, and you have not played the first two games, then I feel very sorry for you, but if you haven't, then you really do need to go play them. If you enjoyed it especially, you will enjoy those two, because the focus and the good things in another episode shine even brighter in the first two games. Now, another series that I've heard about, I can't claim I've played it myself. I have not played it myself. It's Resident Evil Revelations, and I just keep hearing about how similar its gameplay mechanics are to another episode with the third person over the shoulder, laser sight down the beam. I'm probably going to put a screenshot of it all up here on screen just to give people an idea. I don't have gameplay that I can put on there. I've never played it myself. I don't own it. But it's one of those series that mechanically, if you like what another episode's trying to do, that's supposed to be one of the series that actually knows what it's doing to a bit more of a competent level and will give you a more polished experience. Now, it's not going to be Danganronpa in terms of story. I mean, I'm not really sure Resident Evil ever was, but it's probably worth a try if you like the mechanics of this game. Now, okay, that's everything from me. I know this came out really, really late, but that's partly because of some copyright issues on my Persona 4 Dancing All Night series that sort of, kind of, possibly, only sort of worked themselves out, but the changes to that and the extra work I had to put into that basically took up all the time that I was spending trying to get this out, and man, I'm just happy I got this out as soon as I did, considering everything that's come up in real life and this, and on my YouTube channel and all that. So thank you for being patient if you are at the point that you're listening to now. If you watched the Let's Play series, then thank you so much for that. I appreciate that immensely. And thank you all for being here.